Sometime in the last year, a woman you know found out she was pregnant. Maybe she took a test. Maybe she saw a doctor within the week. Maybe she had an app that tracked every day of her cycle. She had options. She had information. She had people who knew exactly what to do. Now imagine this. No test, no doctor, no hospital, no ultrasound, no painkillers, no one who had ever read a single page about what was happening inside a human body. Just a woman, a group of people who loved her, and something happening inside her that no one fully understood. That was pregnancy for 99% of human history. And here's what nobody thinks to ask. How did they survive it? Not just survive, because the data says something that should stop you cold. Hunter-gatherer birth survival rates in groups with no medical intervention are surprisingly close to modern rates in developed countries. Not identical, but surprisingly close. Which means our ancestors figured something out, without any of the tools we consider essential. And the answer changes what we think we know about ancient humans, about community, and about what the human body was actually built to do. Let's start at the beginning. How did they even know? This sounds obvious. It isn't. The connection between sex and pregnancy, the understanding that one causes the other with a 9-month delay, is not instinctive. It has to be learned. It has to be passed down. Anthropologists have documented several isolated societies in the 20th century where this connection was not fully established, where pregnancy was attributed to spirits, to ancestors, to the will of the land, which means for a significant portion of early human history, a woman's body simply began to change, and no one knew exactly why. But they noticed the missed cycle, the nausea that came without warning, the exhaustion that arrived and didn't leave, the way certain smells became unbearable. And here is where something remarkable happened. The group noticed too. Anthropologist Sarah Blaffer Hrdy spent decades studying cooperative breeding in primates and humans. Her conclusion was radical. Humans are not designed to raise children the way modern Western families do. Two parents, isolated, doing it alone. That model is historically almost non-existent. For 200,000 years, pregnancy and birth and child-rearing were community events. Not metaphorically, literally. When a woman showed signs of pregnancy, the group reorganized around her. Other women, mothers, grandmothers, aunts, older sisters, became what Hrdy called alloparents. Literally, other parents. They fed her, they walked beside her, they adjusted the workload of the group so she carried less. This was not charity, this was strategy. Because in a world with no replacement for a woman who could bear children, losing her was catastrophic for everyone. But the group couldn't protect her from everything. Here is the part of ancient pregnancy that most people don't want to think about. Childbirth, for most of human history, was the most dangerous thing a woman could do. The human skull is enormous relative to the birth canal. This is a direct consequence of our brains growing faster than our bodies could adapt. Evolutionary biologists call it the obstetric dilemma. We became too smart for our own births. In modern hospitals, the maternal mortality rate in high-income countries is roughly 10 per 100,000 births. Among uncontacted or minimally contacted traditional societies, estimates range from 250 to 500 per 100,000. That is not a small number. That means in some groups, as many as 1 in 200 births ended with the mother dying. Every woman in an ancient group knew this, not as a statistic, as a memory, as a name, as someone they had watched die, and they chose to do it anyway. That choice, made with full knowledge of the risk, is one of the most extraordinary things our species has ever done. So what did the birth actually look like? This is where the evidence gets specific and surprising. Archaeological and anthropological records from hunter-gatherer societies around the world show a remarkably consistent pattern. Birth was almost never a solitary event. In the vast majority of documented traditional births, a woman was attended by at least 2 other experienced women, often more. A primary attendant who managed the physical process, others who held her, spoke to her, controlled her breathing. These were not random helpers, they were specialists. Every group had them. Women who had attended dozens of births, who knew which positions reduced pain, who knew which plants prepared correctly could slow bleeding, who knew when something was wrong before the laboring woman did. Ethnobotanist Mormon's database of Native American medicinal plants documents over 200 plant species used specifically for pregnancy and childbirth across different groups. Not 1 or 2, over 200. Raspberry leaf to strengthen contractions, blue cohosh to speed labor, cottonroot bark to manage bleeding. Specific barks and roots in and leaves that had been tested across generations and found to work. This was not guesswork. This was pharmacology, conducted without laboratories, without peer review, across thousands of years of trial and observation. Your ancestors were not bumbling through pregnancy. They were running a highly sophisticated system, built entirely from accumulated human knowledge, passed mother to daughter to granddaughter across 10,000 generations. But there's a layer to this that science is only beginning to understand: the emotional architecture of ancient birth. In 2020, anthropologist Wenda Trevathan published research on what she calls the evolutionary context of birth. Her argument was this: human birth is uniquely painful compared to other primates. Not slightly, significantly. A chimpanzee gives birth in a few hours, usually alone, usually at night, with relatively little visible distress. A human birth takes on average 8 to 12 hours for a first-time mother, sometimes much longer. The pain is of a different category entirely. Trevathan argues this is not a design flaw, it is a design feature. The pain of human birth is so extreme that it forces the laboring woman to seek help, to call out, to need other people, which means the very experience of giving birth was, for hundreds of thousands of years, one of the primary forces that held human groups together. Birth was the crisis that activated the community. Everyone had a role: the experienced women at the center, the men keeping watch at the perimeter, the children kept close and quiet, the fire maintained through the night, and when it was over, when the cry came that meant it had worked, the entire group responded, not just with relief, with ritual. Because here is what almost no one talks about: ancient humans didn't just survive pregnancy, they built elaborate meaning around it. The oldest known figurines in human history are pregnant women: the Venus of Willendorf, the Venus of Hohlefels, the Venus of Lausel, carved from limestone and ivory, some of them 35,000 years old, some older. Every single one emphasizes the same features: the swollen belly, the full breasts, the wide hips. These were not pornography, they were not decoration. Archaeologists now believe they were objects of power, carried during labor, placed in the hands of women giving birth, a talisman against the thing every woman in that group feared most. Someone thought about pregnancy so deeply, so repeatedly across so many generations, that they carved it into stone and carried it with them everywhere they went. That takes more than survival instinct. That takes reverence. And then there is the question of what happened after. Because in a world with no formula, no bottles, no alternative of any kind, a newborn survival depended entirely on one thing: the mother's ability to nurse. And here is where the community stepped in again. Wet nursing, the practice of one woman breastfeeding another's child, is documented in virtually every traditional human society ever studied. If a mother died in childbirth, another nursing woman in the group would take the infant, without being asked, without negotiation, because the alternative was unthinkable. If a mother's milk was slow to come in, common in the first days, other women supplemented. The infant was never solely its mother's responsibility, it was the group's. Hurdy calls this the cooperative breeding hypothesis, the idea that human infants evolved to be so helpless, so dependent, so unable to survive without constant care, precisely because that helplessness forced groups to cooperate. The baby that cried loudest survived, not because its mother was strongest, because its crying activated the most people. Human infants are not helpless by accident, they are helpless by design, because helplessness in a cooperative species is a survival strategy. Here is where it connects to you. Modern medicine has done something extraordinary. It has made childbirth dramatically safer. The numbers are real. The progress is real. No one should romanticize a world where 1 in 200 births ended in the mother's death. But something else happened at the same time. We moved birth indoors, into hospitals, into rooms with one partner and a medical team of strangers, away from the community of women who had attended every birth in human history. The isolation of modern birth, the mother and partner alone in a sterile room, is historically almost unprecedented, and the data on postpartum depression tells a story. Rates of postpartum depression are significantly higher in societies where new mothers are isolated than in societies where they are embedded in extended community support. Not slightly higher, significantly. The human body after birth is still looking for the group, still waiting for the experienced women to arrive, still producing hormones calibrated for a world where you were never alone in this. We didn't just change how birth happens, we changed the entire social context that birth evolved inside. For 200,000 years, pregnancy was not a medical event, it was a community event, a ritual event, a moment when the entire group reorganized itself around one woman and one new life. The knowledge was passed down in whispers between women across 10,000 generations. The plants were identified and tested and remembered. The positions were refined over thousands of births. The rituals were carved into stone and carried in hands during labor. None of it was written down. All of it survived anyway, because the alternative was extinction. And the next time someone you know is pregnant and overwhelmed and exhausted and afraid, that fear is not weakness. That fear is 200,000 years old. And for most of that time, when a woman felt it, she didn't feel it alone. She felt it surrounded by women who had been there, by people who reorganized their entire lives around her, by a group that understood, without being told, that what was happening inside her body was the most important thing happening anywhere. We traded all of that for a hospital room, and most of us never even knew what we lost.